Proceed.
Okay. Good afternoon, Ma Africa. Um, on this wonderful day, the 24th of May, 2023, a very important day in the history of Africans, and most importantly, in the history of AmaSirayeli, the world over, not only here in South Africa. Today, I'm joining you in the place of my brother Oletu. Igama lami nguZolani uJola wakamaSoleng, um, originally from Ekarado kwabamaziyo, and also a descendant yamaSirayeli. This day is a very special day to all of us, and we are actually very happy that many of you are joining us today so that we may reflect on this important day and what it means to the history of African people, and most importantly, about what it means to Masraeli as a whole. So we hope that through these engagements, we can make sure that the memory of those heroes and heroines who laid down their lives in 1921 is not forgotten. And even most importantly, we draw some lessons from that massacre. And actually, I would go to even say, if you look at the massacres that continued after 1921, I doubt if as a society we have really learned something from what happened at Bulhoek. And if we do not, we will still have more and more and more massacres coming our way in terms of that. Maybe as a way to begin our session today, we began yesterday where Africa always took us through, the history of this day and the history of Israel, and spent a lot of time, giving us some perspective about Prophet Mgijima in terms of his background, and also how did the church come about, and the events that took place before, during that particular day. So today I would introduce maybe a little bit of a different perspective to the conversation, which is still going to go on for the next 3 days. The aspect I want to introduce on today, or a perspective I want to tackle today, is to look at what happened there from the standpoint of conflict and peace, and actually ask the question if really was there a way in which the massacre could have been prevented? Was there something that could have happened that would have prevented the massacre one way or the other? And the conclusion I want to engage you on today is that the circumstances and the environment was such that it would have been very difficult, if not impossible, for any conflict to have happened with a government like that. So if it did not have to be Bulhoek, it was always going to be something else, regardless of what that is. Hence, even after Bulhoek, we witnessed a whole lot of other massacres. Your Sharpeville, what happened in Soweto, June 16, and Siskai also, and in our democratic era, and also what happened in Marikana. Maybe my starting point is to start with some of the um, two areas that Umafika raised yesterday when he asked actually the question of um, maybe what was the social economic aspect of Israel in Tabelanga then, given the fact that people moved from various areas, and that there was a large gathering of people who were there in 1921. Some estimate the numbers of Amasrael who were there to have been around 3,000 people. And he asked the question yesterday, maybe what kind of social setting that was there in those years, and even in that year of the massacre. But you see, there are pointers to that question, and the pointers are that, in actual fact, Amasirayeli being there in Dabelang, you have many groups of people who were there. Over and above that, others came to Ntabelanga, but there were also people who were staying in Ntabelanga who also were part of that. And also in that process, were sort of clubbed together with everyone as if they were strangers coming from nowhere and that they did not belong anywhere. One such example of it is my own great grandfather, Ujimi Mafuya, who was also born in that area. So it's not necessarily the case that everyone who was there necessarily came outside Ndabelanga. There were people who were from Ndabelanga who had their land there, who are living their own lives, and who were, farmers, depending on subsistence. They were actually living on subsistence farming and doing all sorts of things, to survive. But the reality is that even before the massacre in 1921, is that AmaSirayeli had a very profound sense of development in that area, because what was happening there, you have a system, which is what Professor Edgar calls, is that they were creating an alternative system of government to the apartheid regime. So they were there to make sure that that area, it's an area that is developed for living, and not only for living, for progress, because they were developing an alternative society, in a sense that it was a society that was self-reliant. They were um, manufacturing their own bricks. They were building their own homes. We know that there were various people with skills that were living in that area, in terms of builders, plumbers, carpenters. They were also sewing. They were also sewing their own clothes, and they were, living on themselves without depending on the government in any shape or form. And over and above that, they had their own offices. There was some form of administration that was there, in terms of making sure they knew who was there and who was not there, where they were coming from. So there was some social organization that was taking place in Bulhoek. So the notion that tend to be created is the notion that, as if it was just an empty land and that people came there and then they put tent and then there was no life happening there. There was life happening there. They were building an alternative society, and that society was actually developing, and that society was making sure that the black people who were there were self-reliant, and they were depending on themselves and also not depending on the government. Now, that in itself, created problems to the government, because its policy at the time was actually a policy of, discouraging African people from staying in their rural areas and also in their dwelling. Instead, they wanted many black men to leave their areas to go work in the mines through the migrant labor system. So they were introducing taxes, and it made it difficult for some who did not have money to pay taxes, and they were then forced to go to the mines to work and to build that kind of industrialization in the mining sector, at the backdrop of exploiting people who were coming from the outskirts of Johannesburg. So what you were having there, it was actually an antithesis of what the government wanted to do. Just as it was forcing people to pay taxes and money they did not have, and therefore, if you cannot have it, the only way to survive, you must then go to the mines and work there and live your kind of lifestyle. So that was sort of a counter to that, in that they were building a alternative society that was developing. People were having brick houses, and they were building a society to show that we don't have to go to the mines. We can also live a fulfilled life here in Dabelang. And also those who were there, they were not necessarily paying those taxes as the government wanted to do. So now the fear of the government was that if this is allowed to progress, and if AmaSirayeli are allowed to develop in the way in which they are, this might be a problem, in that many other Africans might see it as an example to show that, look, if we can stand on our own, we practice self-determination, self-reliance, we don't have to be going to the mines. We can develop our own areas and make sure that we then go forward. So they wanted to crush it amongst others to make sure that anyone who wants to do the same thing can know that what happened in Bulhoek to AmaSirayeli will also happen to them. So had Bulhoek succeeded in that sense, it would have meant that Amapulu would see that AmaSirayeli was an example or symbol to all Africans that self-reliance becomes a very important element in which to pursue. So to come back to that question, the emphatic answer is that there was some form of development there. They were geared towards the social upliftment of each other, in addition to the imperative of the religious aspects of why they were there, and also making sure that Indabelanga is to AmaSirayeli what maybe Mecca is to the Arab, and so on and so forth. So over and above the religious aspect of it, you have a very good socio-economic setting that was developing there, and they were very progressive people in that sense. Now, the other aspect that you touched yesterday was around the delegation that was sent there. That delegation was Abo JT Jabavu, Nabo Khubusana, that were sent to Prophet to and AmaSirayeli to convince them to give in to the regime in terms of eviction and so on and so forth. Hence, even post the massacre itself, they were very, very scathing in their attack of AmaSirayeli in terms of they were supposed to listen and surrender to the regime as a way to prevent that. So you have a sense from some of them, while they would claim that they were against the government's action, but they were very critical of the stance that AmaSirayeli took in Bulhoek. But the fact of the matter is that it's problematic if you are going to engage Bulhoek from the prism or from the lenses of the apartheid regime, because you're going to make it an issue of legality in an abnormal environment. Now, coming back to the subject of today, which is really to look at the Bulhoek massacre from the standpoint of conflict dynamics. Many societies, if you look at the history of many societies, societies have had conflicts for many reasons, but largely there are 3 or 4 reasons that tend to be given as why civilization societies, either state actors or non-state actors, will be engaged in a conflict. Most conflicts are fought over territories of whose land is it? Is it yours or mine? And if it's mine, then I take it. If it's yours, you take it. Or if it's yours, I take it by force. And the second one, you also have conflicts, particularly in our continent and elsewhere, over natural resources. Some people do have resources that others want, and they want for free, and they don't want to pay for it, and therefore they tend to go into conflict in order to control resources. And then the third one is the social, economic, and political reasons why there are conflicts. Oftentimes, there are tendencies in society where one group of people wants to dominate, another, in order to contest political power and also to use that political power for whatever agenda they have. So in Dabelanga, you have a a cocktail of almost all the 3 reasons why the environment for conflict becomes inevitable. So my sense is that if that conflict did not happen because of a territory, it would have happened for any other reasons other than the issue of the land. Now, if you look at many Eurocentric scholars, or even the apartheid government itself and its apologies. They wanted to make Bulhoek a legal issue, and that um, um, this is a pure issue of you don't have a title to be there, you should not be there, and therefore you are squatting on a land that does not belong to you, and because of that, you must then be evicted in terms of the laws of the land. So they made it a classic, legal issue. But that was problematic in many respects, because the only time that argument might hold is if the union government, which was led by Jan Smuts, was a government that enjoyed legitimacy amongst its people, and if it was a government that was a government of the African people, in those times. But we all know that the right they are claiming, or they were claiming over the land, was not a right that they were born in this continent, and therefore they had ancestral claim to the land in Dabelanga, and therefore that land was theirs on the basis of that historical claim to territory or even the sovereignty. Their claim largely, was the claim that was anchored on the right to conquest. So because of they had won the unjust wars of colonization against African people, so then they dispossessed African people, and the land that they had taken through the barrel of a gun belonged to them by right of conquest, not because of they have it legally. They did not have that land based on any legal claim. Even in terms of their own Roman and Dutch law, they hold that no right can come out of an injury, and therefore it's a common, or a matter of common cause that the land that the Dutch, the English, all the Europeans they claim in the African continent, they got to possess it because of the unjust wars of colonization, and because of they had superior gunpowder, then they claim to possess that land. Now, and because of that, they then consolidated their power, and consolidated their power through various means. And in this one, which was specifically relevant to AmaSirayeli, the 1913 Land Act was a further consolidation of the territory the Europeans had won in the unjust wars of colonization. And they further expropriated about 87% of the land, and Africans find themselves confined in about 13% of the land across the country. So that battle, that battle in Dabelag, I'm saying it is a battle. Never mind that it is said to be a massacre. Maybe it's a massacre to an extent that there are many people, hundreds of people died at once. But the reality is that AmaSirayeli were not like sheep waiting there to be slaughtered, even though they did not have a superior weaponry as the Europeans did have. They resisted the attack. They confronted the attack. In actual fact, they fought bravely, like all men should fight, because the right to land is equal to the right to life. Because any talk of human rights that does not talk about the right to land, because the land is actually a foundation of everything else that you can claim as a right. So you cannot claim a right to life and then you divorce it to the right to land. So essentially, that battle was it satisfied the first element of territory as a reason for that battle, and therefore the notion that AmaSirayeli were supposed to accept that the land that used to belong to their forefathers was now belonging to the Europeans, and that it must be accepted and they must move on. And then if they are evicted, they should just accept it as it is. It cannot hold. And to some extent, we are actually still sitting in the same problem in that the Europeans are not willing to give in the land. They are not willing to, to part with it, not even an inch of it. Even if you say you want to buy it, willing buyer, willing seller, whatever code name you want to it, their stance is still it is today as it was in Bulhoek, that we want this land by a barrel of a gun. You think you can get it by a pen? We are never going to give you by a pen. And even if you want to get it by money, you're going to pay an arm and a leg. So, in other words, it comes back to the conversation that at some stage Jan van Riebeeck had with the Khoisan when the Khoisan were exchanging some words with the Dutch in terms of saying, as for you to say that the land is not enough for both of us, who should in justice leave the land? Is it the invader or is it the indigenous African? And Van Riebeeck responded that the land is mine by right of conquest. Because if I have won it in battle, I own it. So the whole notion today that they can relinquish land without a fight, I am yet to see that maybe it's possible. Because in their psyche, they are quite clear that the land will never be returned because they never got it through money exchange. They never got it through any legitimate transaction. It was a straightforward conquest, and therefore, because of the conquest, they have it, and it's theirs. If you must take it, you can also take what does that mean. So the only way then AmaSirayeli could hold peace under such circumstances is to accept that the land of their ancestors belonged to the Europeans, and they did not, which was correct. And there is no way that it could have belonged to the Europeans, regardless the fact that they had overpowers our warriors, kings and queen then. But at the time in which AmaSirayeli had to confront this, they did not choose to run away. They faced it and said, look, this land is ours. We are here to worship. You don't have a right to the claim to the land more than we do. And therefore, whatever claim to legality you have is illegitimate because you came to power through violence. You came to power through colonization. And in any event, you are not a government of African people. You are actually an association of the Dutch and the English who decided to share power. And then you think as Africans, we must therefore follow that. So that's the significance of that resistance. It might as well be that it was not necessarily a political resistance. They were saying that from a religious and a spiritual aspect to say we are here to worship our God, but the implications of it carried a political meaning. In actual fact, you can even go further and say their act of resistance was actually an act of liberation. It's no different to that of those who picked up arms to fight for the land, who pick up arms to do all sorts of things in terms of freeing Africans. They actually resisted to say, this land is ours, and therefore we're not going anywhere. So it's very difficult to see how conscious people and how uh, uh, um, particularly people who believes in the centrality of a land as part of their theology could accept to be landless and have nowhere to go. Otherwise, where were they going to worship if they did not have a land in which to worship? You can worship in a land, in a place, and it is unthinkable that we would live in a society that say you cannot worship this way, you must worship that way, and also on the basis that they control power, they will uh, deal with AmaSirayeli in a way that they dealt with them. In actual fact, I will dare go further to say, if maybe this was a different denomination, I doubt they would have dealt with it the way that they dealt with AmaSirayeli. So which then now takes me to, if there was no conflict over territory, could there be a conflict of any other issue between AmaSirayeli and the regime? There could have been, in fact, even this aspect, this second aspect of the conflict was there, even though it's not as dominant as the issue of land. But there were other undertones that pointed to the fact that even if land was not an issue, there was still going to be something else that was the issue. And that thing is actually is the social, economic, and political aspects of the environment at that particular time. And that social, economic, and political context that was there at that particular time is such that the the regime had this notion that anything that is of African origin, anything that is of African dominance, anything that the Africans, are on their own on, it must be rejected, because whether it is for nationalistic, political, or religious reason, they saw it as a potential for a rebellion. So if Africans are coming together on their own without any white supervision, without any white involvement, so it was always viewed with skepticism that these ones are actually starting a liberation movement in order to fight against the colonial regime and all its interests. So that was actually their attitude. So they responded to AmaSirayeli in Bulhoek purely because, over and above the land question, which I've spoken to it quite extensively, on the basis that these people, they are uh, uh, creating their own religious sect, and it's a religious sect that is not defined, or it is not located within the context of the missionary establishment at those age. I mean, in those days, and they were, forefront in those, such as the Methodist, the Anglican, the Moravian, and so on and so forth. But also there was something which Africa yesterday spoke to. At the time, AmaSirayeli also came to the fore. There was a proliferation of African initiated churches. Many African reverends and pastors, many of them who had been schooled in missionary schools, who have been schooled overseas, and they came back to practice under white preachers. They had challenges in those establishments, and some of them broke away to establish their own African initiated churches. And there are many of them: the Ethiopic Church, the AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church, and many others. So the early 1900s saw a whole lot of proliferation of many Africans who actually felt um, felt they could not breathe in this, missionary establishment, in as much as they were preaching the word of God, their actions, that is the missionaries and their colonial masters, were actually an antithesis of the very same gospel that they were preaching to African people. And many of these Africans could not reconcile with that type of double standards. You speak this on the left and then you do this on the right. So many of them broke away and they developed their own African initiated churches. So, from the social, cultural, or even political and social, this was also another terrain of a conflict. In actual fact, there was one magistrate. If you look at her ruling or his ruling in one of the court cases that involve AmaSirayeli, he made some very disparaging comments about Prophet Mgijima. He would say the self-styled prophet, the so-called Israelite. So you could see from that they could not reconcile with the fact that there is an African man who claimed to be a prophet. Something in their mind could only be reserved for any other thing other than African. or even for him to claim to be the biblical Israel. It was a misnomer. They were never going to accept that AmaSirayeli must exist and exist without any supervision or control of white people. And as AmaSirayeli are today, and they were then, it's a church that was started by Africans in America. It's a church that continued in South Africa by Africans. And it's a church that is controlled by Africans. It's a church that Africans worship God through their own imagination, and also according to the plan of salvation that they see themselves as a central part of it, and not some imposed notion of deity that does not see themselves in that. So there was that underlying tension around the social cultural reasons for conflict. So even if the issue of land was not an issue, the 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 fact that AmaSirayeli were an African or a black controlled establishment was always going to be a an issue, and therefore their attitude was that it needs to be crushed, and when is crushed, it must be crushed in such a way that it does not succeed. Now, so from a conflict standpoint, you know, it AmaSirayeli actually found themselves in a history-defining moment, both in terms of the struggle to return the land and also the struggle for self-determination, and that is to see God through their own imagination, to worship God the way they see or the way God revealed to its prophet. And therefore, they had a right without seeking permission to anyone in terms of that self determination. And they were on that path. And it is that path that was actually disrupted in Bulhoek. And it is that path that was disrupted from, continuing all over South Africa. And later on, I think in the 30s or 40s, Uma Munontete would suffer the same fate because they crushed her and confined her to a mental hospital here in Pretoria West, purely because they were afraid that should we allow this prophetess uh, um, to succeed and to grow, we might see another situation similar to Bulu, and therefore they put the entire state machinery there and confined her to the mental institution here in Pretoria West. So that's the gist of the this thing, that whichever way you look at it, whichever way we look at it, if it was not AmaSirayeli, if and it was any other black organization or black church uh, um, at that particular time, had it existed for reasons similar to AmaSirayeli, it would have been crushed anyway because they did not want anything like that. So hence, even they could tolerate others who were actually not disturbing the status quo, actually who wanted to be integrated in the status quo in terms of the pleadings that they will do and address them in ways that says, look, you are now the owners of this land, you are now the sovereign of South Africa. Can you give us better treatment and better rights? And those were accommodated, and they were not treated in ways that AmaSirayeli were treated in, or anyone actually who challenges their sovereignty over the 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 issue of the land in South Africa. So it therefore becomes very important for us to understand that socio-economic context of that massacre, so that we do not forget about it. Now, there is also another interesting thing that perhaps we need to respond to in this. They claim that they went to Bulhoek Massacre to enforce law and order. Um, They claim they went there to enforce law and order to remove people who were otherwise there illegally. So they had no intention of killing anyone. They had no intention of violence. It was just AmaSirayeli are the one who who pushed them into a state of violence. But the fact of the matter is the opposite. You know, uh, the fact of the matter is the opposite. I at some stage I ran into another um, South African Journal of Military Studies. You know, I think it's volume 26, number one of 1996. And in that military journal, you know, there is a conversation around the planning that they had in Pretoria in terms of how they should deal with that massacre. Um, the first thing that they had to show that they did not go there to maintain law and order is that they deploy around almost 800 security personnel, and out of that there were over 600, you know, armed officers, that is soldiers, infantry, maybe special forces and all of that. And they had about 42 machine guns, that is the troops carrying machine guns. And also they had 55 artillery troops. Now, you imagine you are bringing artillery to people to maintain law and order, and divided themselves into about 3 regiments that then had to confront, you know, unarmed people, you know, who were actually there, you know, to worship. Also, in that journal, you would see that they had a conversation actually at some stage that they wanted to bomb um, a, a, you know, Bulhoek. They had planned to send in 2 aircraft and then to bomb those people. And also one chap said, "No, we're not gonna drop that bomb on them. We're actually gonna drop 2 bombs around AmaSirayeli. Maybe they will be scared." So you drop military bombs, and then you suppose that people will be scared. Maybe I should just read this for the sake of our of our viewers. You know, page 31 of that journal says, after the Department of Justice received the telegram from the commission, preparations were made by the South African police and by the Union Defence Force to assemble a strong force to enforce law and order in Bulhoek. The Union Defence Force suggested the use of aeroplanes to intimidate the Israelites. The director of the air services, now the South African Air Force, that which was Colonel P. van Reineveld, suggested that the aircraft should circle over the Israelites and then drop the bombs widely and safely around them to intimidate them. The idea of using aircraft and the dropping of bombs was later abandoned, as it was felt that a mere spectacular display will only strengthen the Israelites in their determination to resist authority. It was further felt that the use of bombs will endanger the lives of men, women, and children. So you can then
I see that you had disconnected for one reason or the other. What happened? I see that you had disconnected. What happened? Um, I'm not sure what seems to be the problem, my brother. Are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me? Okay, let me proceed as well, because I'm not sure what seems to be the problem with brother Zolani. Um, at this moment, colleagues and friends, viewers, those that are watching with us on Ponte Politique on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Again, as you know that my name is Thandelo Tukadlanga, Umtunga Uyengwa Umalingi, Undima Kankumbuzo. I'm coming to you. I'm live in Enoch Mgijima municipality in one of the commemoration sites of the Bulhoek Massacre and Enoch Mgijima. If you can see in my background, just slightly, you are able to pick up that this is
I can hear you now.
the allocation of the freedom of Enoch Mgijima local municipality. So earlier I had moved around when Zolani Masoleng was making his input around the issue of Bulhoek Massacre, which transpired on this day, on the 24th of May 1921. Now we are 102 years in commemorating of that particular event, massacre, that particular war, that particular incident. Zolani, you said it was an unjust war. It is not only just a massacre, but it was an unjust war. I think I heard you talking about that. But also at the same time, earlier I had made a move, because yesterday when you were talking about the contestation of the settler colonial government, the Union government of South Africa, and the claim of the land of the people with which AmaSirayeli and Mgijima were being pushed away from. They claimed that we are the owners of the land on the basis of colonial conquest. Now, earlier I made a video around the hexagon square. If you remember yesterday, I had mentioned that for us who were born and raised here in Komani, we know that this is not a circle, it is a hexagon. And I showed you a hotel. It's just on my right hand side where I'm standing. It's on my right hand side. It's called Hexagon Hotel. That's where the decision of finishing AmaSirayeli was taken by the regime and the soldiers. And on my right hand side, so the hotel, the name of the hotel is still there. And I'm going to turn, I'm going to turn my camera around again to show them the path with which the soldiers then took when they were going towards the side of Ndabelang. I'm going to turn the camera around so that you are able to see the direction with which they took from the Hexagon Hotel. So they took the direction going towards the side of the north. As you can see, I'm pointing from Hexagon Hotel, going the side of north. And once they got there around Takastad, they took the left turn, going to what is called the Bulhoek. And when they got to Bulhoek, they utilized what is they used the mountains. I said that yesterday. They operated and moved from the mountains, and they did not enter the city of Ndabelanga in the front, in the main gate. They used the mountains. And what was advantageous for them was the fact that the land with which Mgijima and AmaSirayeli was sitting at, it was the land that was allocated as the crown's land. It was the government's land, and therefore they claimed that they had a an authority and claim and legitimacy in that particular land. Hence, they did the way that they did. So, my brother Zolani, I've heard you talking about a few things, and I just want you to clarify one point when that you were talking about. Earlier, you were saying that even though there was a problem of the contestation of the territory and the land, there were other elements that could have caused the conflict. Without the land, there could have been other causes of the conflict. Can you just give us a summation of those conflicts? Those other aspects that could have caused conflict without the particular land. I don't think I was able to pick up as to what was your view on that.
Yeah. All right. Can you hear me now, my brother?
I hear you very well.
Yeah, no, I think what disturbed us was load shedding.
Oh, okay.
So, it messed us up. Yeah.
But
I hope
were you done? You were not done with your presentation, isn't it?
I think the gist of it was done. Maybe just to zoom in to those areas that I must amplify, like the one you are asking now.
Okay.
In
Okay.
the other, social cultural, arena of conflict that was there. Look, there are three of these major elements to conflict. One is territory, which is evident here. The other one is the battle for natural resources. That area, there isn't much natural resource, like in terms of minerals, but the kind of resources, maybe the river, the access to the river for grazing, and also land to plant, and also to rear animals, and also for living. Then the third one, which is also was there, but is not as prominent as the territorial conflict, was the social, cultural, political, or even economic aspects. Those ones were one. Um, the government at the time, they had an attitude, or they had taken a stance that any African originated, African controlled, and also, African thriving religious or political organization, it needed to be destroyed. And it needed to be destroyed because they saw it as a source of rebellion. So they could not accept to exist organizations that were felt were too autonomous, and that in their control and origin, they do not have some form of influence of either the missionaries, or also even the colonial authorities themselves. And therefore, they view them as a source of rebellion, and anything like that needed to be crushed. Now, AmaSirayeli are an African originated church, originated in America, and even it came here in South Africa, and it was controlled, and it still remains a church that is controlled by African people. So it is a church that was not acceptable in those times. Just like any other African initiated churches were not received well. So the colonial authorities, if you look at in their court records, you will see that they contested even the very notion that there could be a black person who is calling himself a prophet, and there could be a black organization that says, or even a black prophet that says, this is what God said to me. So to them, what was accepted, what was accepted is a situation where you must go to God through a white missionary, and that the pastor was your intermediate to God. So it was a misnomer that an African can say, I God Almighty said this to me, and I have a plan of salvation, and that plan of salvation was different to what the missionary establishment was propagating in society. So at that stage, there was a confluence between the colonial authority and the missionary establishment. You could not separate church from state. It was almost intertwined. And therefore, anything that did not have that control was a problem. And another area of conflict or contestation was even the notion that AmaSirayeli could claim that they are descendant of the biblical Israelites was actually a source of conflict because the Europeans not only colonized people and they colonized the land and enslaved people, they also colonized information because the way they project and they narrate the biblical story and the biblical history, it's as if the biblical the people of the Bible are necessarily white people, and then when we look at them, we must think of them as white people, and also think of the image of God as any other thing but themselves. So the whole notion that AmaSirayeli could claim to be the descendant of Israelites, something at those stages that had the connotation of it's only white people who could claim such, was a source of conflict, and that came out clearly in some of those court cases where that attitude was attacked by the magistrates and also by the authorities. They could not accept that you must be a black organization on your own, where still you could claim that you are a descendant of the biblical Israelites. And this was sort of blasphemous in their eyes. You should understand and also follow Christianity according to the missionary enterprise. Anything that was outside the domain of the missionary enterprise was a source of rebellion. I'm not sure if you capture that.
No, I did. Enkosi kakhulu, Jola, on clarifying me on that, and hopefully even the others will and are clarified. Just now, a few minutes ago, as I'm sitting here, somebody came to me, and he's looking at this monument, and he says, I'm asking him if should I move so that um, he can satisfy his eyes with whatever that he wants to see in this monument. He says to me, ungabi nangxaki, ndisajonga lama comrade, lama comrade asinika inkululeko, lama comrade asiphathela inkululeko. So in the main, don't worry, I'm just looking at these comrades who brought us freedom, because these comrades gave us the freedom that we are enjoying. So I thought I should just share that with you a little bit, because I'm here now and I'm in this monument. I'm not in the big monument that is in Tabelanga. The monument is a Enoch Mgijima municipality Komani. It was unveiled in 2021 during the centennial commemorations. So what I wanted also to speak about a little bit, because most of the time when people talk about AmaSirayeli and this killing and this massacre of these worshippers, sometimes people do not even make sense of that. There are names that are attached to these people. Just behind me, there's a list of up until let me see, it's 43, and then on the other side there's another 43, and on the other side there's another 43. So you can see that there are names that are attached to these people who were massacred by the Union government, who were killed by for standing up on all these elements that you are talking about. Now, in relation to yourself as your family, you mentioned that earlier you are a descendant of AmaSirayeli and those who were in Tabelang. Where and how did your family come about to join or to be part of the church AmaSirayeli?
All right. Look, this is actually a very, it's a very, important moment for us in our family each year, this time. because our great-grandfather, one Jimmy Mafuya, was also killed in that massacre on this day 102 years ago. When he was killed there, he was actually a, a citizen of that area. And be there, a traditional surgeon, and living on farming, and he was actually self-reliant. And he was one of the earlier in the group of converts when the church came to that part of the world and converted to the church. And then yes, that's him at 69. Yeah. So he converted to the church, and then he was married to one lady, Akwasiwisa, Umamjwaha. And then together they had 5 children. And after the Bulhoek Massacre, Umamjwaha had to leave in Dabelanga under those circumstances, because almost everything they had was lost, and the homes were demolished. And then she moved to Queenstown with her 5 children. She had 5 children: Unomva, Priscilla, Mafuya, Ubonelwa Mafuya, Ushedrek Mafuya, Umtutuzile, Nonontutuzile. Those were twins. And then those 5 then had in 10 about 24 children. 24 children, and out of them, we they had 59 great grandchildren and 79 great great children, and 23. I think by now we had 2 more born in the past 2 to 3 years. So about 25 great 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 grandchildren that come from there. So we keep track of this generation that came from, Utatumkhulu Jimmy, who also passed away in that. So that's how we got to be connected with the church. And then when they moved to Queenstown, the children, as they grew up, others went to Mtanzane, others stayed Ekomani. We still have them, Ekomani. And then others went to Craddock. So my grandmother, who was also a daughter to Ujimi, married a gentleman from Lesotho called Umvangelu Johannes Bulhoek Masoleng, and moved to Craddock. And then they settled in Craddock and have kids. And we were born actually in Craddock. So ever since we were born, all of us, the memory of Bulhoek was kept in our minds through oral tradition, through books, in terms of making sure that we never forget what happened and we learn from what happened. And most importantly, we follow in the footsteps of our great grandfather in terms of, how we think we should relate to our God, and what is the plan of our salvation. And we shall forever be indebted to that, and do everything we can in our power to see to it that the Church of God and the saints of Christ continue on the footsteps of those who laid their lives for this faith, who laid their lives for this land, and most importantly, uh, come close to the ways and the will of God. So we are keeping that memory alive, and we are actually hoping that each year this thing must be big, and we must put faces behind the massacre. More and more families must come up. They must tell their stories, and also make sure that we continue on that path.
I wanted to just get to that particular point of stories, families, and all that. From the church historiography, okay, people will understand and know that I'm a historian, by the way, so I engage in a lot of heritage and history. But the church historiography speaks about the struggle of these mothers, the wives of the men who got killed in Dabelang, their children and all that. Do you perhaps have a little bit of an information as to how did your great grandmother, whose husband died in Dabelanga on the day, lived therefore in Komani when they were then brought in? Because the archives are reflecting that when they came here in Komani, it was Queenstown at the time. There was uTata Mgijima xa ethetha uthi besizizigxekwa zegeza. We were a laughing stock of those who were looking at us. So, from your family perspective, how did your parents tell you, or your great grandparents tell you of their struggles when they got into Komani, away from the land of honey and milk, inverted commas, in Dabela? Do you perhaps have something or some insight to share there?
Yeah. No, it was very difficult. My grandmother used to tell me that when they arrived at Komani, it was tough. They were accommodated by, some relatives and others, even it was just good Samaritans. And then over time, they had to build their own little dwellings, shacks, others, just so that at least they can have a roof over their heads. And then the beauty about Uchimi, they were, self-reliant people. Just as it was the case with many African people, there was no issues of employment. People were living through their own hands in terms of farming and this and that. So Umam Chwaha actually lived off knitting. She was doing a lot of things with her hands, knitting, selling hoods, selling blankets, anything that she could survive with. And out of those little things that they were living with, she was able to send some kids to school. And as the kids started to grow and start to work even themselves, they then built her a home in Queenstown, and then others left to Craddock, where they established their home. Actually, two went to Craddock, one went to East London to establish their own home, and then two remained in Queenstown. So life was quite hard. They literally they had to start from scratch, all of them. They had to start from scratch with nothing.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah, it was tough. So even if there were to be compensation, compared to the human suffering and the loss of life, it will be very, very expensive in a way. And even whatever they would say, it's a monetary compensation. It will just be something, but it will never be able to recover everything that was lost. But in any event, the call for restitutions and reparations and restoration of injustice is as valid today as it was valid anytime. Because in any event, as Africans, we hold that Ichala Alboli. It doesn't matter how long does it take for restorative justice to happen. Restorative justice must happen, whether it takes 50 years, 100 years. So as long as no justice is visited upon the families of the victims, even their great children, that will forever remain a sin similar to what happened in the Garden of Eden. We still hold what happened there as a sin today, more than thousands of years later. And
it's a grudge.
It's a grudge. We still have that grudge. So it will never go away. And these ones who are claiming the right to territory by right of conquest, we reject that right, because no right can arise out of a wrong. And also, in any event, it doesn't matter the fact that it takes long. It must still be corrected. It won't go away as long as we live.
I see. I know that for a fact. When I was at some point, I used to be told about the church history. that the people who were then scattered, basically they were scattered in Komani, scattered here in Komani by the by the regime, and their husbands and others had died. They were buried in shallow graves. Others were arrested and all that. And then those who were remaining were scattered. And the families were basically led by few women and few children. I know one of the functions and one of the tasks that these mothers did and used. Raskunjan, yaphila. Usandas, one of the functions that these mothers used and did was that is to cut the grass to use it for roofing at the time, because there was no zinc and there was no asbestos. And the introduction of the asbestos in the later years by the apartheid government had then taken over that self-reliance. And another point that they were using was the washing. They were doing laundry for the locals. They were keeping the kids for the locals, because the locals were working, and the victims of Entabelanga, Abafaz Babo, had to make ends meet. So I'm trying to prove the point that you're making, that life was very difficult. It's not something that can easily be compensated in relation to that. Any view that you want to talk about before we can, in the next 5 minutes, we close our session?
Yeah, no, that's quite correct. Africa is my issue is that I would like to thank AmaSirayeli for keeping this memory in our daily life, and that what happened in Bulhoek must never be forgotten. And most importantly, it must be a lesson. And my worry is that I doubt that lesson has been learned. If you look at what happened in Marikana and Andrestatane and all of these incidents where African people are being killed, the fact of the matter is that as soon as um, people, stand up for their rights one way or the other, most often than not, the state feel threatened by that, and being threatened by that, they respond to them in ways that are violent. So a peaceful response is actually a misnomer than violence. We expect them, as and when they respond to people, they respond to people with violence. And what we don't learn from that is that if you don't address socio-economic problems, if you do not address, the crisis that we see, of inequality, poverty, unemployment, and the skewed distribution of wealth, you will still have rebellion, you will still have conflict. And that if you think that the police, you're gonna hide behind the police to suppress legitimate protests, then massacres won't end. And the Bulhoek massacre is one case in point that the politicians wanted to use the military, to hide behind the military and guns, to run away from solving a problem of illegitimacy, and a problem of dispossession, and a problem of conquest. And our government needs to learn from that, and all of us need to learn from that, that we need a people-centered development. We need a people-centered government, and all of us that we developed together. And if we do not learn that lesson, there will be many Bulhoek massacres in future, and even many Marikanas, because when people are rising up for one thing or the other, you want to use force to suppress them, to keep quiet. But if you do that, the problems don't go away. So if anything, AmaSirayeli, all of them, let's continue on that path and make sure that we learn from them, and we become even more united, and also more focused. And continue on that path of self-reliance. I concentrated my lecture on self-reliance around how they were able to be on their own self-determination, self-reliance.
I
Let's
see.
refocus ourselves and look at how we can depend on each other, support each other economically, socially, and make sure that we really do what any other person is doing. Indians would rather buy to other Indians. Arabs would rather buy to other Arabs. Whites and Jews are doing that. So why are we unable to, to foster a common development of African people, particularly as AmaSirayeli, in terms of supporting one another? We need more of that and common development and common progress and walk in that path. That
Yeah.
would be my
No, no, that's a beautiful parting shot. I want you to make a comment on this funny video that is always making the rounds on TikTok, the one of Umfundisi Israel. So I want you to make a comment on this before we close. And I'm closing with it deliberately because it forms part of the essence of why this Bulhoek Massacre commemoration, this AmaSirayeli, this Enoch Mgijima remembrance is important. So I'm going to play it. I played it yesterday. We'll keep on playing it. What is your view on that video?
I think it's just that people are not used to it. But to us, we have dresses for different occasions, and
Yes,
occasions like this one, we wear such clothing and symbolizing all sorts of things. And I think the issue is not so much about us, about AmaSirayeli and how we dress
yes.
during this time. The
I
issue
think
is
it's
about
the
how
clothes.
they do.
It's how the clothing and what they do, including
Yeah,
the songs that many people say in social media that no asibava bathini bayamzela
yeah.
abantu.
So it's got less to do about us. It's got more to do about them and them not understanding these people.
No,
If they really, if they really want to understand us, they've got to do much more than watching videos and
I see.
Facebook and come join our church as visitors so that they may know us better. But there is no way you know the symbolism of that by just looking at a YouTube video or even understand and know our songs just by. I mean, even the hymn has a significance that you won't get in a
Yes,
video.
yes.
It expresses beyond the words can express. We hymn, we hum. So that you won't get that in a video. So my advice to those ones who are listening and also watching and they want to know more about the church, visit any church here in Pretoria, Johannesburg, Eastern Cape, everywhere, so that you can learn more about us and maybe even what we need to do ourselves in these spaces like you are doing. We do more education around who we are as AmaSirayeli, what we stand for, so that at least people can know more. But we've got different kinds of uniforms for different, and that
Mm.
one is just one of the uniforms we
Is
have.
that one of them?
In actual fact, even it was at some stage, people were even saying, "You that church, they kiss each other. Even kissing is forbidden."
And bancedwa COVID.
Yeah,
I don't think there's a kissing now of men to men and men to women and everybody else.
yeah. So uh, they need to understand that we we do things in a certain way, and there is a meaning behind everything we do, and we invite them to come and observe us and visit us in all our tabernacles, and they will see a beautiful side and a beautiful services. But otherwise, everything we do it's about worshiping God in ways that we relate and through the ancient plan of salvation. And it's a very beautiful faith, it's a very beautiful doctrine. And once they can come to him, I think they will fall in love with it.
Yeah, no, Jola, Masoleng, thank you very much, Srael, for being part of this and holding the fort for day 2 of the 102nd virtual Bulhoek Massacre commemoration on Pont de Politique. Siyabulela kakhulu Zolani for your time. Thank you very much, Mdanomhle.
Thank you very much, African. Thank you very much to all of you Africans. And happy African Liberation Day tomorrow.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mukhar. Sharp.
And thank you very much for joining us on this wonderful day 2 of the Bulhoek Massacre commemoration 102 years later. And we were having Brother Zolani Masoleng. He's one of the descendants of those people who were massacred in Bulhoek, and he was giving his perspective and analysis of the Bulhoek Massacre, Enoch Mgijima, and his theology, and including his socio-cultural issues relating to Bulhoek Massacre. So we thank him for being part of this conversation, and we appreciate the fact that you were holding with us as we are sitting in this monument in Komani, in Hexagon Square, talking about the Bulhoek Massacre and also Enoch Mgijima, the prophet of God and the prophet of the Israelites. We hope to see you again tomorrow. Uthandelo tukadla ngumntungwa uyengwayo kamalinge undima kankumbuzo uthi kuni nangalemva kwemini. Thank you very much and enjoy your day. Bye bye.